Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. I don't think I'm the father or the godfather, more like the orderly standing in the back of the room while this is hopefully born. I am going to tell you about the Broadband Challenge, but I didn't realize that intro was coming. It's very good. We have, the city of Chicago has tried, let's just call it Next Generation Network, probably 3 times in the last 14 years. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit about today is why we think this time it'll work. What is different about our goals and what is different about the assets that we bring to bear. So I think this is the clicker. Very good. So the Mayor Manual talks about the city as a platform in a variety of different ways. The city has always kind of been a platform, but we mean it quite literally these days. We have an open data initiative, for instance, the vital signs of the city published in real time and updated nightly at data.cityofchicago.org that's created a real ecosystem of innovation, application development sort of outside the city. So that's one type of platform. Obviously, we are a city of transportation platforms, but really we're thinking of next generation networking in the sense that this slide conveys, which if you're not from Chicago, you may not know that it was the stockyards here in the 19th century, the livestock yards, that actually gave birth to Chicago as the nexus of the transnational railroad, right? Moving all that livestock around. It spawned secondary innovations like the refrigerated rail car to move that stuff so that it didn't rot. And it spawned even tertiary innovations like the futures and options exchange. All of this because of a network. Now, in this case, it's a transportation network, although the sort of happy coincidence of this is that still more internet traffic by volume passes through the city of Chicago in North America than any other city, and that is a consequence of the fiber right-of-way over those 19th century rail networks. So it matters. You can see this visualized in this graph. But why are we doing this broadband challenge? And what's different about what Google's doing in Kansas City or what Chattanooga's done or what we've attempted to do in the past? We are in the midst of an infrastructure, over sort of traditional infrastructure, sewers and water mains and streets, the likes of which Chicago has not seen in many, many years. We are at the structural end of life in many ways for century-old sewers. And we consider broadband to be just as important, if not more important, in creating a kind of grid in the same way that we've created a street grid here. We see it as the most important play to participate in a 21st century in a digital economy. Someone that was up here recently was talking about LTE take-up in Seoul. The mayor, his vision of the city of Chicago is to be the Seoul, South Korea of the United States. So what does that take? Well, it takes the city bringing something to the equation. What do we have? So I mentioned the sewer and the water main work. We're opening up 2,000 miles of street in the next 2 years to replace segments. We see this as a golden opportunity to lower the cost, lower the capital expenditure that's normally very sizable for providers to get into the streets to lay conduit or lay fiber. We are coordinating where we have unused capacity, which is the third bullet point there, unused capacity on our transit lines or in our public safety lines with those street cuts, right, such that the fiber is made available at no cost, the street rips are made available at no cost, and that reduces 2 of the real inhibitors to a new network. You may not know, also a legacy of the 19th century, there are freight tunnels 40 feet below every street in the central business district. It's where coal and coal dust used to be delivered and removed. But that's primarily where the private sector and our own fiber runs now. You don't have to rip up anything for that. It's a very unique right-of-way that we have. And then the other thing that I sort of like about Chicago, it's different than, say, Manhattan, is the almost totally ubiquitous network of alleys, which is where the utility poles are. It's where trash is picked up. But it's also a place to micro-trench or run fiber aerially. So we bring all this to the table. There's an example of replacing a water main. And then there's the economics of this. So we spend, the city of Chicago and what we call sister agencies like the Transit Authority and others spend upwards of $30 million a year on lease lines and internet service provision. We anticipate being able to offload some of that to this new network that we've asked for. Probably not all of it. Given where we've asked for this network to be built, it won't hit every city and sister agency building, but there is some portion of the internet spend that the city has that brings to the table as kind of a seed investment here. So the broadband challenge is really asking for three things. The press, of course, and the public at large, characterizes this as free wireless in public spaces. That is a happy consequence of a new fiber network. It is not the primary driver. We have wired up, or we do have free wireless in Millennium Park, but that really isn't what attracts a business to come to Chicago. It's not what stokes innovation. You know, you're not sitting in a park. What we've asked for is a fiber ring, gigabit speed, to 12 areas of the city. Those areas include if you know the city, Fulton Market, River North, places where we see a vibrant technology ecosystem already, and then other areas of the city that show the characteristics of being able to be like that. So this is not a fiber to the home play. This is a fiber to very targeted commercial zones that we call innovation zones. Right now it costs $3,500 a month for gigabit service. For the burgeoning startup culture here in technology, biotech, clean tech, that's too much. And so this gigabit network, which we do not intend to be an ISP, by the way, we want it built, we want it open. And the open piece is the real key to this, right? We think of it in the same way that we think of the street grid, right? We build, we maintain the street grid, but it is a platform for businesses to come up off of. And we view this network in the same way. So that's the primary one, the open gigabit network for economic development, business development in commercial areas. These probably will be meaningless to you, but it's the central business district, it's some of the outlying areas, and then it's most of our major research campuses. So not the colleges themselves, they're set for connectivity. It's the areas around them, right, where you've got an ecosystem of businesses in the way that you do around Harvard, in the way that you do around Stanford, for instance, that kind of clings to the university area where we would bring this broadband. So another piece of this, though, is if you have a fiber network, it seems irresponsible not to build upon it, not to take sub-gigabit speed networks into neighborhoods. And you notice, I do believe that the initial ask here is a wireline network, but this might not be. And this might actually intersect with some of the concerns of folks in the room. There's an interesting project on the south side of Chicago. The University of Chicago has partnered with a company called Gigabit Squared to take a fiber network from the university out into the neighborhoods, 3 neighborhoods. The other 6 that they're targeting, they're going to do with wireless. And so to your point, we do seem to be at a tipping point where Wi-Fi might not be the solution, right? The ubiquity, and actually just this week, it's referenced in the Sun-Times piece, a survey of connectivity, broadband, in the city, and smartphone penetration is off the charts here, even in what we consider to be underserved areas. And for a small percentage of our residents, that is their primary way of connecting. So how this gets accomplished, we've released what's called a request for information. It's open through the middle of this month, November, rather than issue an RFP, because we know that there are so many different ways of achieving, especially this goal, that we didn't want to be prescriptive about how it was achieved. So, but we do believe that the platform of the sort of commercial network can serve to increase options in our neighborhoods. Now, the last one, which is the one that the press loves, and it's just funny. I mean, you guys must see this all the time, the way networks get characterized in the public imagination as if Wi-Fi sort of rains down from heaven and everybody has it in their homes and things like that. It really isn't that. It's, we've selected a few parks, a few public spaces, some of our beaches, for free wireless internet service as a sort of hanging off of the fiber network itself. This, too, will mean very little to you, but is an attempt to be to cover much more of the city and all of the wards in a way that the commercial zones just necessarily don't. So I'll end, and then maybe we can have a bit of a conversation by talking about where this is all pointing. There's been some conversation here today about the Internet of Things and machine-to-machine networks. This is a high priority for the city of Chicago. When you walk down the sidewalk, just have a think about how many network endpoints you are passing in public objects on the street. We've got 3,500 parking meters that are standalone computers, networked computers. Those big belly Solarcom posters there, those trash cans, those are on the internet. That's how we know they're full. In the spring, public bike share, a la DC and Paris, is coming, where the bikes and the stations themselves are online. And then, of course, the transit signage. And then, of course, people just sort of walking with mobile devices. The thing is, none of these things, hang on just a sec. None of these are talking to one another. There is no Internet of Things. If you visualized this digital public way, it would look like this 19th century photo of Chicago. So while we don't see the fiber network as being absolutely crucial to this city as platform, we are working on the standards, and it's basically an urban operating system, to let these things interoperate, to let the bus shelter know how many bikes there are available, for instance, three stops down. And then more mundane things, more internal things, like allowing us to control our streetscaping irrigation and traffic controls. I would be very happy to have a conversation about machine-to-machine networks as it bears on this. A simple example, we believe that if a public object is on the network, it should be made public in the way that we make our data public. It's paid for by taxpayers. This is a very simplistic example, but conceptually, it's right on. So all of our bus stops signs have SMS short codes on them. So if you don't have a smartphone, but you want to know when the bus is coming, you just text that number and you get it back. You are, in essence, interrogating a public object. What's actually happening is it's going over the cell network, of course. But that idea, right, that if something is networked in the public way, it should be open. It should have an API. It should be queryable. It should be buildable on top of, just like you can build on top of our data platform. And the applications are many that, the city really does conceive of itself as the provider of the platform rather than the end user app development. You get interesting things like smart wayfinding and journey planning screens throughout the city and bus shelters and things like that. And I'll just close by saying that what's interesting about planning something like this is this quote from William Gibson, the science fiction author, who said when the first iPad came out, we won't really know what the iPad's about until we see what the street decides to do with it. And that's kind of that's true, right? Some of the most interesting things that happen in an urban milieu were not what was intended in the design. And I'm thinking here of urban planning and architecture. But I think we need to keep this in mind as we design these networks and we design these open interfaces to public objects. And it's a little bit scary for an engineer or somebody from a computer science background, right? We design systems, we test. If they do not meet the initial design specs, we go back and we fix it. And that's fine. But I do also believe we need to build these networks and build these interfaces in a way that permits usage in ways that we didn't dream of. This is what makes cities vital. This is what certainly makes Chicago vital. And I thank you for your time. Maybe we could take some questions now.
So first I note, your mayor is pretty well connected with the president, perhaps not as well as the governor of New Jersey. Apparently he arranged for Sandy not to come to Chicago, is that right?
Sandy's outer bands did come to Chicago. We shut the lakefront down 2 days ago.
But he didn't help dig any of these holes you're trying to dig.
No, no.
So, all right, good. So we do have some microphones. I could monopolize the questioning again, but I'll make it known now that you've got questions here.
You said that the fiber network is supposed to be open.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And in contrast, what would it mean if it were closed?
Well, closed would be many of the networks that we have now, which are not leased to other providers, not open for use by multiple providers. I mean, actually, there are many open networks. This is happening all the time. The Comcast and AT&Ts of the world are sharing and leasing and entering partnering arrangements. What we want to do, I mean, what's important about that word is the way that it promotes competition. It is cost prohibitive for new data providers to come in and wireline networks here because of the cost of putting the fiber in the ground. So, the spectrum actually isn't we have closed today and we want open. It's actually a bit of a mix of both. We just believe that the city cannot build a network that benefits a single provider.
So let's just explore that.
Yeah.
So AT&T wants to put fiber there, no problem.
Wants to use this network? Sure, right.
No, wants to put fiber in your conduits now that you've built them.
Yeah, and they do that now, but yes, in this case. So I should say, and there probably are representatives from Comcast and AT&T here, they have been part of this. all along the way. And I am 99% sure that they will be a part of the responses that come in the middle of this month. It's just a question of, what combination of. My guess is that you may get one or two holistic proposals that cover all three of those goals. But actually, it'll probably be some sort of consortium of people or organizations that either want geographic specificity or they only want to tackle one of those goals. We'll do the wireless, but not the fiber, something like that.
Great. We have a question over there.
Yes. Could you tell the audience a little bit about? You showed some of you talked about infrastructure assets and services. A couple pictures of parking services, car sharing, obviously transit as well. How are you, and how these assets don't communicate with each other? How are you going to get the service providers, your transit agency or your parking service providers, to sort of communicate with each other and provide sort of services that obviously overlap each other?
Well, so I mentioned open data, and the city of Chicago really is kind of leading in municipalities in the publication of real-time feeds. The funny thing about that is that's done for the public, but it sort of obviates interdepartmental sharing agreements. You don't need that if it's all out there, right? So for instance, you get applications that can be built that seem holistic, but they're pulling data from multiple. So we have real-time bus and train tracking here, and that's been integrated with 3-on-1 requests. Two totally different departments, right? So there's that. There's the technology answer, but then there's also, and I don't want to slight the importance of having a chief executive that is basically saying, we will do this. The very first thing Mayor Emanuel said last year at the very first cabinet meeting he ran was, we are publishing this data. No more data sharing agreements, no more silos, and that's been very helpful. I mean, much of what I do is in the community and sort of bottom up, but top down helps occasionally too. Thanks.
Question?
Hi. A very exciting project that you're doing, and having the capability there as a platform is one thing, but as you speak about things like machine to machine, how are you creating an ecosystem or an environment to encourage that?
From a hardware or software development standpoint?
And from a business perspective, in terms of what initiatives are you creating, and what atmosphere or environment are you creating? So
one is changing the way that we procure software, or at least changing the terms under which we procure it. So for instance, when we put the bid out for a public bike share, we required that the data that's generated from that bike share and actually accepted from that bike share have an open documented API, right? That's the first step, right? That we're not bringing any new software into the city that is monolithic or closed. Okay, so that's the first step. The other actually though is a little squishier. It's more social. It is being very plugged into the community of, let's call them civic developers, civic innovators. People who either have businesses that are built upon the vital signs of the city, the data. So think of people who make transit apps and things like that, or who just do it sort of on the side. Now, to date, they have only been building applications and running analytics on data that's being put into the portal. But this is a community, several hundred people large now, and we've done a lot to bring them into the fold that will be the front line in the development of applications that sit on top of this networked public object space. Where we're not very far along, though, is the hardware side of things. I mean, each vendor, for instance, brings their own set of networking hardware. The public bike share will have, probably, edge capabilities, for instance, to do the credit card swipes and things like that. So we don't have a unified strategy on that front. We think that we can sort of mitigate some of the differences in the networking hardware by creating a kind of urban, it's more like a kernel, an urban operating system that these things contractually need to integrate with.
Can I follow up?
Great.
That's creating the platform aspects, but from a perspective of attracting new industry into Chicago and creating a mechanism for enabling machine-to-machine or Internet of Things business development to become a hub or an eco-center for the U.S. How do you see that as a mechanism?
It's funny. I don't see the machine-to-machine. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, there's a couple things that we're doing. The fiber network itself, actually, we believe is a draw, can be a draw. The other thing that I haven't talked about at all is the dynamic spectrum sharing pilots that we're doing with the FCC, right? So that's a different kind of economic development that's happening here. You know, the machine-to-machine space is so new that I could absolutely imagine a company building for-fee value-add services on top of the APIs that we expose from these network public objects. Right now, I'm actually just thinking about what the city can do and what sort of third-party developers. But there will be a class of businesses that build application services off of objects in the public way. I'm quite certain.
Well, I know
Hi,
you're
a
thinking.
quick question.
I know you. Oh, where was that question coming from? Oh, there he is.
Yes, hi. Regarding once the network is built, let's say a few years down the road, there are several options to operate and maintain that network. I mean, you could do a build, operate, maintain model, or you could partner with service providers or vendors. And you know, somewhere in the RFI that's also mentioned. So what is your view? What would be the best positioning for the city right now as you see it in terms of maintaining and operating the network once it's built?
Well, it's going to be very dependent on what comes back from the RFI. If no one proposes, one particular model, we'll know that that's not feasible. I think the answer, though, is that we absolutely don't want to operate the network unless what is proposed touches a majority of our own facilities. You know, this is not primarily an effort to get the city a new network, city with a capital C. It's an effort to get the city with a lowercase c a new network. But if the business model that is proposed to us requires that they assume our internet spend, then I think we'll have to play a role in the operation and maintenance of it, as we do now, in the sort of small network that we do have. So it's sort of an open question at this point, depending on what gets proposed.
Thank you.
And do we have one last question?
The world's first T1 line was in Chicago. The world's first fiber optic line was in Chicago. These were able to happen because of historical preservation of the pneumatic message tubes in the 40-foot underground freight tunnels. Is there any effort by the technology department in the city to aid historical preservationists so that the old infrastructure might be adaptively reused for the new technology?
First of all, I got to change my opening slide. Wasn't the first cell phone call here too? Something like that?
I think so.
Okay, so we're just a city of firsts. I mean, the freight tunnels are being preserved. The catenary wire, it was an electrical rail line, is still down there. And you know, you probably don't remember this, but that tunnel system flooded many years ago, and fish were coming up into the. So it is highly preserved in the sense that it's highly it's closed off. You know, I'm always looking to piggyback on existing infrastructure. That's really the difference between doing this in a New York or a Chicago versus doing it in the cities that are kind of springing up from nothing in the Far East, right? Is it oftentimes it's harder here, but oftentimes you get these unintended benefits from existing rights of way. You know, one example is that Wacker Drive, I don't know if you've been on that since you've been here. Wacker Drive runs along the river, and it's essentially a bridge because there's an upper and a lower. The lower is for loading. And what that gives us actually is there's something called a utilidor, which is basically a trench, but it's hanging off the ceiling of the upper deck that runs the entire length of Wacker Drive. So you don't, and Wacker Drive curves around the city like this. So you can just drop the fiber right in there. You don't even have to rip it up. So I don't have a specific example beyond the freight tunnels, but we're always looking to capitalize on what came before.
Well, you know, in New York, they've got a little problem with the subways being flooded, and they've decided they're going to fill them up with fiber optics. Forget about transportation. Just move the electrons around. What do you think?
You know, I don't know the conductivity of dirty water. I don't know how well the signals will pass.
And the other joke they're making is, since cell phone coverage is so unreliable and people's cell phones are not charged, there's no electricity, you know, they've now gone back to the payphones that have mostly been ripped out. But wherever there are payphones, there are long lines of people standing in line in front of a payphone. Most of them didn't have an idea of how it worked.
Yeah.
They hadn't used one in such a long time. They didn't remember they had to bring quarters and put the things. So you got to keep the old stuff around too.
Well, and also, I mean, my mayor said this when he worked for the president, you know, never let a crisis go to waste. There are actually some unique opportunities for testing things when you've got circumstances like are going on in New York. So for instance, they're essentially running a congestion pricing pilot right now. Right? I don't know if the ban has been lifted, but as of yesterday, you had to have like 3 or more people in your car across the bridges. And that's a test case that would have never flown had there not been external exigencies. So,
great. Well, thank you so much, John.
Thanks.